Alien Girl saw the human stand against the breaking wind. His reason for staying shifted her heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The cold wind cut across the barren, rocky landscape like a blade, biting at every exposed inch of Jack Miller's skin. He stood tall, his body bracing against the harsh winds that seemed determined to knock him off his feet. Despite the chill, the blustering gusts, and the icy particles stinging his face, Jack did not move an inch. His boots dug into the ground, his muscles tensed, but his stance remained steady. He was in the middle of nowhere, on an alien planet far from Earth, but his resolve was unshakable. Jack was a soldier, and soldiers didn't just survive, they stood firm. That was the mantra that had kept him alive through countless battles, and today, it was no different. But there was more than just survival driving him now. As the wind howled and whipped around him, Jack noticed her, the alien girl. Lyra, as she was called, stood several feet away, watching him with a gaze that was both curious and skeptical. Her green skin shimmered under the harsh light of the twin suns overhead, and her silver hair fluttered wildly around her face. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were a piercing shade of blue, filled with a strange mix of wonder and confusion. She had seen many species in her time, but humans were still a mystery to her. Her world had no place for people like him. People who would stand against the very forces of nature, against something as indifferent as the wind. She had been taught that survival was a matter of cunning and strength, that you had to fight to win, not to just exist. But there he was, this human, standing firm against nature, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She had seen warriors, leaders, and conquerors, but Jack's quiet defiance was different. He wasn't fighting to prove anything. He wasn't trying to dominate the storm. He was simply enduring it. And that endurance, that quiet strength, stirred something inside her. It was a feeling she hadn't known before, a strange warmth that began to bloom in her chest. She was an alien, raised in a culture that valued power, strength, and the harsh realities of survival. But Jack wasn't like them. And for the first time, she questioned everything she had ever known. As the wind slowly died down, Jack exhaled, the tension in his body easing, and he turned to face her. His voice was low but steady, carrying a hint of something deeper. "It's not the wind that will break you," he said, his gaze holding hers. "It's whether you choose to stand against it." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but she felt like his words had pierced through her, touched something hidden deep inside her. She had always been taught that emotion was a weakness, that it was something to be controlled. But in that moment, in the quiet between them, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to strength than she had been led to believe. And as the last remnants of the storm faded into the distance, a new understanding began to form in her heart. The quiet that followed the storm felt almost surreal, as if the winds themselves had taken a breath and paused to observe the two figures standing in the aftermath. Jack Miller shifted his stance, now facing Lyra directly. His gaze, though steady, held a gentleness that belied his military background. Lyra stood still, her piercing blue eyes locked on him, still processing the words he had spoken and the unexpected feeling they stirred inside her. She had never thought about strength in the way Jack seemed to define it. The alien world she came from had taught her that survival was about dominance, about seizing control of every situation. But here, before her, was a human who didn't need to fight to survive. He simply endured. She didn't understand why it fascinated her so much. She had always been the strong one, the one who led, the one who commanded respect. Yet, Jack's quiet resilience spoke louder than any command she had ever given. As the wind died down completely, she stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate. She felt a strange pull, like gravity drawing her closer. "You're different," she finally said, her voice soft but with an edge of uncertainty. Jack watched her carefully, his face unreadable, but something in his eyes softened when he spoke. "Maybe," he said simply. Or maybe I'm just someone who's learned that there's no shame in standing still when everything around you is falling apart. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what it was, but the way he spoke, the way he stood in the face of the storm, made her feel something she hadn't felt before. Something raw, something real. She had always been taught to suppress emotions, to remain distant from others. But Jack didn't hide his emotions, nor did he shy away from vulnerability. It was as if he was offering her a glimpse into a world she had never considered. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with a quiet understanding, as if, in that moment, they both knew they were witnessing something significant. Finally, Lyra spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" Jack's eyes flickered, a hint of confusion crossing his features. "Because I believe no one should face the storm alone." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. He wasn't just talking about the wind or the harsh environment they were in. He was talking about something deeper, something that resonated with her in a way she couldn't quite understand. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt a crack in her armor, a vulnerability she had long suppressed. She had been alone for so long, surrounded by the expectations of her people and the weight of her responsibilities. But Jack, a human from a distant planet, had shown her a different way of living, a way that didn't require always being in control, a way that allowed for connection, for empathy. She took a step closer to him, her eyes still searching his face. "You're not like the others," she murmured. Jack didn't reply at first, his expression contemplative. Then, slowly, he reached out, offering her a hand. A simple gesture, but one filled with sincerity. "I'm not perfect, but I do my best to help when I can," he said. Lyra hesitated for a moment. Then, almost without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The touch was light at first, as if testing the waters, but the moment their hands made contact, something shifted. A warmth spread through her, a connection that was unlike anything she had ever known. She realized then that the storm wasn't just something they had survived together. It was the beginning of something more, something neither of them could predict. And as they stood there, hand in hand, the world around them seemed a little less cold, a little less lonely. The days that followed were strangely quiet. The planet, with its harsh terrain and unpredictable weather, seemed to soften in the presence of Jack and Lyra. Their bond, forged in the heart of a storm, had deepened with each passing moment. They traveled together, navigating the rugged landscape as Lyra learned more about Jack and Jack about her. For Lyra, it was an adjustment. She had always been taught that emotions were a weakness, something to be controlled or hidden away. But Jack's unwavering kindness, his refusal to see her as anything other than a person, not a weapon or a means to an end, had a profound effect on her. As they sat around a fire one evening, Jack shared stories from Earth. He spoke of cities, of people, of a world that, in many ways, was so different from hers. He talked about the quiet beauty of nature, how even the harshest storms could pass, leaving behind clear skies. Lyra listened, fascinated by the way he spoke. There was something in his voice, something in the way he viewed the world that made her feel different. She had always felt like she had to prove herself, to fight for her place in the universe. But with Jack, she felt seen, not for her strength or her status, but simply for who she was. It was a strange feeling, one she couldn't quite put into words. "So what about you?" Jack asked one night, breaking the silence between them. "What do you want out of life, Lyra?" She looked into the fire, watching the flames flicker and dance. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of how to answer. In her world, desires were always tied to duty, to expectation. She had never been allowed to simply want something for herself. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice soft. "I've always been told what to do, what to become. But with you, it feels different. I never thought I could just exist." Jack smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said gently. "Sometimes, it's enough just to take a step forward, even if you don't know where you're going." Lyra looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a way that wasn't clouded by the fear and doubt she had carried with her for so long. There was a calmness to him, a peace that she envied. He wasn't afraid to just be, to exist without needing to prove anything. I think I want to learn how to just live," she said, the words feeling strange but right. Jack nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his voice steady. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't known she was capable of. It wasn't just the warmth of the fire or the planet's gentle breeze. It was the warmth of something new, something that had started to bloom between them. They didn't need words to understand each other. They simply existed together, two beings from different worlds, finding common ground in the most unlikely of places. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, Lyra realized that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Jack was beside her, not as a protector or a guide, but as an equal. And in that moment, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The days stretched into weeks as Jack and Lyra continued their journey across the rugged terrain of the alien world. The initial silence that had existed between them was slowly replaced by the comfort of shared experiences, the quiet understanding that passed between them without words. Lyra had begun to open up more, her walls, once impenetrable, slowly crumbling. She shared stories of her home, the place she had left behind, and the expectations that had been placed on her. Jack listened, never interrupting, simply offering her the space to speak. It was a different kind of conversation than she was used to. In her world, dialogue was often an exchange of power, but with Jack, it was something more genuine, more intimate. One evening, as the two of them sat under the vast, star-filled sky, Lyra found herself watching Jack in a way she hadn't before. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of their campfire. The lines of his expression relaxed in the peaceful quiet. He had been telling her about Earth, about his home, and the people there. She had never considered Earth much before, but now, with Jack's words painting pictures of a world so different from her own, it seemed far less alien. "What was it like, growing up on Earth?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack leaned back, looking up at the stars. "It wasn't perfect," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But it was home. I grew up in a small town, nothing fancy, but we had everything we needed. People worked hard, helped each other out. It wasn't always easy, but we made it work." Lyra listened intently, intrigued by the simplicity of his words. "You make it sound peaceful," she said. Jack smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "It wasn't always peaceful, but there was a kind of quiet strength in it. People there don't often show it, but they care for each other. That's what I've learned, I think. Strength isn't always about fighting. It's about knowing when to hold your ground, and when to step back and let others in." Lyra thought about his words for a long time. In her world, strength had always been something that had to be proven, something that came with power and control. The idea that strength could come from vulnerability, from allowing others to help, was something she had never considered. It was foreign to her, but at the same time, it felt right. "I never learned that," she said quietly. Jack turned to look at her, his gaze gentle. "It's never too late to learn." Lyra's heart stirred at his words, a feeling she had not expected. It was a feeling of hope, something that had seemed so distant for so long. She had always been taught to be independent, to never rely on anyone. But here, with Jack, she was beginning to understand that it wasn't weakness to lean on someone else. It was part of what made them stronger. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, the conversation flowing easily between them. Lyra found herself laughing at Jack's stories, something she hadn't done in years. The warmth of the fire, the sound of Jack's laughter, and the quiet comfort of their companionship made her feel something she hadn't realized she had been missing, a sense of belonging. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt like she was more than just a warrior, more than just a princess bound by duty. She was a person, with hopes and fears, and for once, she felt like it was okay to have both. And as the fire burned low and the stars above seemed to watch over them, Lyra realized that, in the company of this human, she had found something she had been searching for her whole life, a true connection. And perhaps, for the first time, she could begin to imagine a future where she wasn't alone, where she didn't have to face the world on her own. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Lyra's journey continued, the bond between them deepening with each shared experience. The alien world, once so foreign and harsh, was beginning to feel less intimidating, perhaps because of the company they kept. The landscape, while still difficult to traverse, no longer seemed as unforgiving. Together, they learned to navigate it, their steps synchronized in a way that spoke of their growing understanding of each other. It was during these quiet moments, when the hustle of the outside world seemed miles away, that Lyra found herself reflecting on what Jack had said. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how different her life had been from his. On her home planet, everything had always been about survival, about strength, about leadership. But here, with Jack, the focus had shifted. Strength wasn't about dominating or being in control. It was about enduring, about supporting one another when the world felt too much to bear. One evening, as they set up camp beneath the stars, Lyra found herself staring at the fire, lost in thought. Jack noticed her silence and, without a word, sat beside her, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow over both of them. "You've been quiet lately," Jack remarked, his voice gentle, as though he knew she was wrestling with something. Lyra glanced at him, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause. "About everything. About my life, and what it's always been." Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "What have you been thinking about?" he asked, his tone encouraging but non-intrusive. Lyra hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Back home, I was always expected to lead, to fight, to be strong. But here, with you, it's different. I don't have to be anything other than who I am. I don't have to prove anything." Jack listened, his eyes never leaving hers. He could see the conflict in her, the struggle between her past and the person she was becoming. "I know what you mean," Jack said softly. "I've spent a lot of my life trying to prove myself too. But I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is just let go. Let others in, even when it feels scary." Lyra looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to until now. The weight of her responsibilities, her past, her identity, it had all been a burden, one she had carried alone for so long. But here, with Jack, she felt like she could finally breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more meaning than she could express. Jack reached out, placing a hand on hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "We're in this together. We'll figure it out, step by step." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words. It was the first time in her life that someone had offered to walk beside her without expecting anything in return. The realization was both freeing and overwhelming. She wasn't alone anymore. As the night wore on and the fire slowly dwindled, Lyra found herself drifting into a peaceful sleep, the warmth of Jack's presence beside her a comfort she had never known before. It was in this quiet, shared space that she began to let go of the expectations that had once defined her. And for the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a future that wasn't shaped by duty or survival, but by something much more precious, companionship and hope. As the days passed, Jack and Lyra grew even closer. Their bond, once fragile and uncertain, had now blossomed into something unspoken but undeniable. They shared stories, experiences, and dreams in the quiet moments of their journey. The planet they traversed, once a vast and hostile expanse, now seemed smaller and more manageable with each step they took together. One evening, as they set up camp beside a small stream, the night air cool and crisp, Lyra spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of thoughts she had kept hidden for so long. "Jack," she began, her gaze fixed on the flickering campfire. "Do you ever think about the future?" Jack paused, his hand resting on the log beside him. He hadn't expected the question, but it was one he had asked himself many times. "I do," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. "It's hard not to, but I think about it differently now. Before, I was always focused on the next mission, the next goal. But now, I think about where I want to be, who I want to be with." Lyra turned to look at him, her blue eyes reflecting the firelight. There was a softness in her gaze, a vulnerability that she had never shown before. "And who do you want to be with?" she asked quietly. Jack smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I think you already know the answer to that," he said, his voice low and sincere. Lyra felt her heart skip a beat. She had never allowed herself to entertain thoughts like this before, never dared to imagine a future where she wasn't alone. But with Jack, everything felt possible. She had spent her entire life defined by duty, by her position, by the expectations placed on her. But here, with him, she felt like she could finally be herself. Jack, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I never thought I could feel this way. I've always been taught that feelings are a weakness, that I had to remain strong, unyielding, always in control. Jack's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You're strong, Lyra, he said, his voice warm. But being strong doesn't mean you can't feel. It doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Lyra's chest tightened, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of everything she had carried for so long begin to lift. She squeezed Jack's hand, a small, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. I've never known this kind of strength, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but I think I'm starting to understand what it means. Jack nodded, a sense of quiet understanding passing between them. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the night filling the space around them. The crackling of the fire, the distant rustle of leaves, the gentle rush of the stream. Everything seemed to fade into the background as they shared this moment of quiet connection. Lyra's heart raced, but not out of fear. For the first time in her life, she felt at peace. She didn't need to be anything other than who she was. And with Jack by her side, she realized that she didn't have to be alone anymore. Together, they had already overcome so much, and the future, whatever it held, didn't seem so daunting anymore. As the fire flickered out and the stars above shimmered in the dark sky, Lyra knew one thing for certain. She had found something more valuable than anything she had ever sought before. Not power, not control, but the kind of love and companionship that could survive any storm. As the weeks continued to pass, the landscape around Jack and Lyra began to change. The once desolate, rocky terrain started to give way to lush, green valleys. The air grew warmer, the soil richer, and the stars above them seemed closer, as if the universe itself had noticed their presence and decided to welcome them. They had traveled far, both physically and emotionally, and yet, neither of them could have predicted the path their journey would take. Lyra found herself looking at the world through new eyes. She had spent her entire life focused on survival, duty, and the weight of expectations, but now, with Jack by her side, she had the freedom to simply exist. To feel the breeze on her skin without worrying about her next battle, to watch the stars twinkle in the sky without thinking about the pressures that had once consumed her. It was a strange, almost foreign feeling. I never imagined I'd find peace like this, she said one evening as they sat on a grassy hill, overlooking a river that sparkled in the fading light of the sun. Jack turned to her, his expression soft, a small smile tugging at his lips. I think peace is something you find when you least expect it, he said. Sometimes it's not about searching for it. It's about letting go of the things that keep you from it. Lyra thought about his words for a moment. The weight she had carried for so long, the weight of duty, of responsibility, of her past, had started to feel lighter. She had been taught to suppress her emotions, to bury her feelings under layers of control. But with Jack, she had learned that it was okay to feel, to open up, to trust someone else with her heart. I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Trying to live up to the expectations of my people, of my position. But now with you, I feel like I don't have to be perfect anymore. Jack's smile deepened, and he reached over, gently taking her hand in his. You don't need to be perfect, Lyra, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. You're more than enough just as you are. Lyra's heart fluttered in her chest at his words, and for the first time in her life, she believed them. The walls she had built around herself, the walls that had kept others out, were beginning to crumble. She wasn't sure when it had happened, whether it was the first time Jack had stood beside her in the storm, or the countless moments they had shared in silence. But she had started to realize that she didn't have to face the world alone. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of her past anymore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the landscape, Jack and Lyra sat together in comfortable silence, their hands still intertwined. The world around them was vast, filled with unknowns, but in this moment, they had everything they needed. They had each other. And for Lyra, that was enough. She had come to understand that life wasn't about perfect moments or grand achievements. It was about the quiet moments, the ones shared with someone who saw you for who you really were, who stood beside you when everything else seemed uncertain. And as the stars began to appear one by one in the night sky, Lyra knew that her journey with Jack had only just begun. As the days passed, Jack and Lyra continued to travel together, the landscape around them shifting with the seasons. The once harsh terrain was now bathed in the warmth of a new season, bringing with it the scent of fresh flowers and the sound of rushing water as rivers swelled with the spring rains. Their journey had become easier, more comfortable, though the challenges they faced were never far behind. They had become a team, working together to survive and explore this strange, new world. Yet, despite the beauty around them, a sense of unease had begun to settle in Lyra's heart. She hadn't spoken of it to Jack yet, but the memories of her people, her responsibilities, were never far from her mind. She knew she couldn't escape her past forever, no matter how much she wanted to. Jack noticed the change in her, the way she grew quiet at times, her thoughts seeming to drift far away. He knew she wasn't the type to talk about her past easily, but he also knew that it weighed on her. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jack turned to Lyra as they set up camp. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice gentle, though tinged with concern. "Is everything okay?" Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she finally spoke. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but soft, "about what comes next, about who I am and what I'm meant to be." Jack didn't respond right away, choosing instead to sit down beside her, offering her the space she needed to speak. "Back home, I was always told what I had to do," Lyra continued. "I had my place, my duty. I never really had the chance to choose for myself. But now, with you, I don't know what to do with all these feelings, all this uncertainty." Jack reached out, placing a hand on hers, a simple gesture of support. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "You don't have to be anyone you don't want to be. You've got the freedom to choose now, and you don't have to do it alone." Lyra turned to him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find the truth in his words. She had never known this kind of support before, never known that it was possible to simply be, without the weight of the world pressing down on her. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. "But what if my past catches up with me?" she asked quietly. "What if I can't escape it?" Jack's expression softened, his grip on her hand tightening just slightly. "Your past doesn't define you, Lyra," he said, his voice unwavering. "It's a part of you, sure, but it doesn't control who you are or who you become. You're not the same person you were before, and you don't have to carry that burden anymore." Lyra looked down at their joined hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the present moment. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. That, no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, the kind that only comes when two people know that, in this vast, unpredictable universe, they found something worth holding on to. As the fire crackled softly beside them and the stars began to twinkle above, Lyra felt something stir inside her, a sense of hope that had long been buried beneath the weight of duty. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live for herself. And with Jack by her side, the future didn't seem quite so daunting. They would face whatever came next together, not as two people bound by circumstance, but as two souls who had found something rare, a bond that transcended the boundaries of worlds and expectations. The days continued to blend into one another, as Jack and Lyra's journey took them deeper into the heart of the alien world. The vast landscapes they once saw as imposing and untamed had become familiar territory, a place where they felt an undeniable connection not just to the land, but to each other. The time spent together had brought them closer, not only in proximity, but in understanding. Their shared silences, their quiet moments of reflection, had become as important as their conversations. Lyra, once distant and burdened by her responsibilities, had begun to embrace a new part of herself, the part that could feel joy, love, and even uncertainty without the fear of judgment. Jack had become her anchor, the steady force that held her in the storm, and she had found in him someone who saw her not for the title she carried or the expectations placed upon her, but for who she truly was. One evening, as they walked along the edge of a river, the sound of the water rushing over rocks filling the air, Lyra stopped and turned to Jack. The expression on her face was one of quiet contemplation, the kind she often wore when deep in thought. "Jack," she began, her voice soft yet firm, "I've been thinking. About everything. About us." Jack, sensing the weight in her words, paused and looked at her, his expression open and patient. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm, as if ready for whatever she needed to say. Lyra took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I never imagined I would be able to let go of everything the way I have with you," she said. "Back home, I was always told who I was supposed to be. But here, with you, I've learned that I don't have to be defined by my past. I can choose what comes next." Jack smiled gently, the warmth in his eyes making Lyra's heart swell. "You've always had that choice, Lyra," he said. "You just needed to realize it." Lyra's gaze softened, her eyes filling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, an emotion she had long buried. "I've been so afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that if I let go, I'd lose everything. But now, I realize that by holding on so tightly, I've been holding myself back." Jack stepped closer, his presence a comforting constant. "You don't have to hold on anymore," he said softly. "You found a place where you can be free, and you don't have to do it alone." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. The fear that had once gripped her heart began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady hope. She looked up at the stars above them, the night sky stretching endlessly across the horizon, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe without fear. "Thank you," she whispered, the words simple but filled with meaning, "for showing me that I can be more than I ever thought possible." Jack's hand gently cupped her cheek, his touch soft but steady. "You've always been more than you knew, Lyra," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm just glad you're starting to see that." In the silence that followed, the world seemed to pause, as if giving them a moment to savor the peace they had found together. The stars above them sparkled brightly, a reminder that, no matter how vast and unknown the universe was, they had found something precious, a bond that was not bound by past or future, but by the simple truth that they had each other. And for the first time, Lyra was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that with Jack by her side, she no longer had to fear the unknown.